Why don't we talk a bit more about what you're doing right now? So you're working, and I mean, you're focusing on tissue regeneration,
Yeah,
but how exactly do you go about that? And I know you've told me before you're doing work with 3D printing human tissue. If you could
yeah,
touch on that, it'd be fantastic.
yeah. So the broader field that I work in is called biomaterial science, and it all comes back to that hierarchy I explained with cells to tissues to organs. So every organ in your body is specific, and it's made up of specific materials. And those materials are basically within the tissue. So if you think about bone, for example, it's very stiff, very hard, because it's made of materials that make it very stiff and very hard. The brain, on the other hand, is very soft and very weak because it's made of materials that make it soft and weak. And so throughout your body, those very specific materials are produced because the cells within that tissue are programmed within a way that they produce the right materials. Now, what we try and do in the lab is try and replicate that. So what we do is we take materials that are either the same as the one that are present in that tissue or in some way structurally similar, and also can replicate some of the physical properties. So if we're talking about bone, we want something that's very stiff and hard. And we can make something that's essentially a three-dimensional material and embed cells within that, and they will grow throughout that structure and start to remodel it into something that is more like tissue. I mean, a good example is this is how lab-grown meat is working. They put cells into this kind of 3D environment, and they basically grow into a functional tissue that you can cook and eat. I'm not sure what I think about that myself, but that's how that works. And this kind of thing does work. There's plenty of studies where there's one came out of the University of Birmingham a couple of years ago where they essentially grew a bone in the lab, and it was in many ways resemblant of a bone. It looked like a bone. Had the stiffness. It had the cellular network of a bone, and you can see examples where these three-dimensional materials can be implanted into. A lot of it is in animals at the moment, and they actually regenerate these tissues over time. But it all comes down to making sure that you choose the right materials for your three-dimensional structure and put the right cells in there. And if I can touch on the printing as well, there's a level of complexity in these structures that's hard to replicate. So the brain, for example, is not one material with one cell type. It's multiple materials with different cell types, and they're all in very specific places. So the question is, how do you replicate that complexity? How do you ensure you've got the right cell type in the right material in the right place? And the answer is 3D printing, because you can put different cell types, different materials in very precise locations and build some of these really complex structures. And you can use those to try and regenerate something. You can use those to try and understand how diseases develop. You can even use them to screen potential new drugs. There's a company in Boston who now uses tissue engineered skin to test cosmetics, so they don't have to do animal testing anymore. So they do have real world applications.